Welcome back to another episode with Fight Night Picks. As always, we're brought to you by SimBody. Vertiball is now SimBody. If you head on over to their website, simbody.com, you're going to get all the great products that you know and love, including the SimBody Vertiroller and the Vertiball that you have seen most likely here in studio. Look at that. Place it, lock it, attach it, Vertiball, all sorts of great stuff over there if you want to roll out those old tired muscles and you don't want to go with that old lacrosse ball. They're also coming out with that very new product that you can see right in front of you. And if I head on over to my cart, look at that. I've already got a Vertiball over there. Little bit of a deal right there. And if you hit the try for 60 days risk-free, use the promo code FNP and you're going to get 10% off your order. With that code FNP at simbody.com, you're really helping out another local company here in New Brunswick, Canada. Can't wait for it. The new name, SimBody at simbody.com. And as we always say, let's get into it.
A last look at the big card. Be sure to head into the chat and have your say. Let's get into it and join in Fight Night Picks ? Kicks.
Bonsoir et bon matin tout le monde. L'MMA de Paris, ça vient aujourd'hui. Matt, I can cut intros in French if I want to.
And everybody hates it.
And they do because we have a big time card coming up. Matt, it is only under the dozen of fights. There are but 11. We have Gane taking on Sergey Spivak in that main event. As always, one half of your host duo, Craig Allen. Twitter and Instagram at CraigAllenFNP. With me to my left, to your right, respective socials, MattAllenFNP. It's a little bit of a flu game for me because, Matt, people remember that one time we did question mark kicks and I hid my hand because I had a nasty thing going on. I got stung by a wasp. And
no one would know if you didn't bring it up.
This weekend I got stung by one in the foot and it's blown right up. So we have a big time fight card. I know people are excited about it. Chandler Witt's over there in the chat. Drew, MMA Millionaire. Chris McDowell as well. Noah. We've got everybody over there tuning in, enjoying the show. And I threw it out there to you guys, YouTube community tab, what you thought about the fight of the night. We'll throw it on over to that screen in a second. But overall, when you look at this card, Matt, a lot of debuting fighters. We have the two returning fighters in Taylor Lapilus as well as Rhys McKee. McKee against Ange Loosa. Lapilus, just throw up the juggling balls and juggle the fights around. He was originally supposed to be taking on Muin Gafurov, but he ultimately draws Caolan Loughran, a kid from Ireland who's built like a milk truck down at 135 pounds.
Can you call him a kid if he's only like 2 years younger than you?
He is.
All right, Dana White, settle down.
He's making that debut at 8-0. So a lot of fights to look forward to. A lot of French fighters on this return to Paris. And I know we're amped for it.
And I think this main event's a lot more important than some people do realize. Like, Gane at one point was looked at as the next generation of heavyweight, right? He moves like a small guy, but he's got a massive frame. We all know how talented of a striker he is. But the last few fights, and even the win over Tai Tuivasa, we've seen a couple cracks in that armor. And as he has progressed, listen, he still is one of the better fighters in the world. But if you're not able to beat Sergey Spivak, where does it really put a guy like Gane? Because again, he was looked at as like the Darko Milicic, if you will, of this division in the future. But he hasn't necessarily been able to get a lot of consistency at the top. I think this is a great fight to get back on track.
It should be a big-time matchup. Both guys kind of coming in different circumstances. Spivak's been beating guys up through the ranks. Gane coming off that title shot loss, but again, Gane, the former interim champ. So I know people are fairly split on that matchup. 62% of you right now going with Gane, but the Sergey Spivak crowd, you guys have filled up the comment section this week. So from the community tab this week, Matt, I said we throw it on over to the Fight of the Night screen. The folks voted. This was their number one pick for Fight of the Night. Benoit Saint-Denis taking on Thiago Moises. This the fight before the co-main event, and we'll talk about the co-main event. I'm kind of bury the lead there, but when you do look at this one, Matt, Saint-Denis taking on Moises. Moises, the accredited black belt in jiu-jitsu. Saint-Denis with the judo, the jiu-jitsu, the striking pedigree. And Saint-Denis been kind of going scorched earth his last three fights. Took his UFC debut on about a month's notice against Eliseu Zaleski dos Santos. we talked scorched earth. He got torched in that one.
did.
So a big time opportunity for these two guys just before that co-main event.
And it's an important fight for Moises because he has been at the top of the division for a while now, right? Like, we have seen him fight quite a few people in that top 15. He wins some of those fights. He does lose some of the other ones, but at least we have a pretty good idea as to where he is established in the division. But for Saint-Denis, like you said, he has been climbing up the ranks as of late, but it's a big step up going from his last matchup to this one against Moises. But I think he has all the tools to go out there and win this fight. It's just a very dangerous one for him.
It definitely is, and you guys voted for this as your second pick for a possible fight of the night. The co-main event, Manolo Fiorot taking on Rose Namajunas Matt for the Boo Birds for an entire week. The fans like the French fighter in this one in Manolo Fiorot, but if you get 100% of each fighter, because that's the thing. I don't know if we're going to get 100% of the fighter on the right-hand side.
The Knicks said that when they signed Derrick Rose. They were like, if we get Chicago Bulls Derrick Rose, knowing they were never going to get him.
But if we get 100% out of these two fighters, it could be a great fight. Rose Namajunas has been in a couple of Fight of the Year contenders, one for sure, and it did win. She's had a lot of bonus money into her pocket in the time that she's been in the UFC off the Ultimate Fighter. Again, it's a champ taking on another great fighter in Fiorot. It should be a good one.
For Fiorot, too, a lot of her fights have started to get closer as she has gone up the ranks, right? And this fight against Namajunas is probably going to be the most difficult one of her career. I know Rose is moving up in a division, and honestly, I don't think she is going to be a massive fighter at 125. She wasn't even that big at 115, but she is as skilled as they come. I've compared her a lot to the Chris Paul of MMA because she outsmarts her opponent. She is good in most aspects of the game. She has good cardio. This will be an interesting matchup, though, because we know how dangerous Fiorot is, especially on the outside. And Rose, for all the credit, she can even have success in that range of her own right. She can get hit sometimes, and if Manolo starts to tee off on her, this fight should be absolutely insane.
Well, let us know who you have as we go down through the entire card. You can hit up the chat if you will. You can also hit up the super chat as well if you want to help out the show. A like is always appreciated. But as you know, with Fight Night Picks question mark kicks, we start from the bottom. We end here with the main event being Gane taking on Sergey Spivak. First fight that's on the card, Matt, Zarah Fairn taking on Jacqueline Cavalcanti. This fight, I assume, was going to be at bantamweight. It's catch weight of 140 pounds. UFC roster watch. Cavalcanti's on the roster. Then she's gone. Zarah Fairn was there the whole time, but she didn't get her picture taken with all those French fighters in front of the Eiffel Tower. I don't know what that was about. Fairn looked relieved to make the weight yesterday on Friday, but she does make it. So both coming in at or around the 140-pound catch weight limit. Fairn 6-5. The 3 losses in the UFC. Megan Anderson, who got a title shot. Canadian Felicia Spencer, who got a title shot, and then, of course, that last loss against Joselyne Nunes. But I bet you, what percentage of the audience probably watched that fight? 5%?
If they're watching us, probably a lot higher than 5%.
I don't think it's a big percentage, but I did think that Zarah Fairn had won the second round and the third round against Nunes. It's just going to come down to, how does Cavalcanti's cardio look? Because I've seen it wane through fights. The Nora Cornolle fight, the fight that Cavalcanti had her last time out for the LFA title, nearly had her opponent finish in the first round. That was a Canadian. And then Cavalcanti saw her opponent rally as the fight went on. So I know Cavalcanti is much younger than Zarah Fairn, but I don't necessarily like the gas tank. The striking defense isn't all that great either. So, and again, I hate the odds on this one, so I'd stay away from it, pot and popcorn. I have Cavalcanti, but it is ever so slightly here.
Yeah, with all that being said, I do still have Cavalcanti. For Zarah Fairn, yes, she is a good striker, but she's not somebody who's really going to sit down on her shots and knock you out with one punch. Yes, she has good strikes going up the middle that could meet Cavalcanti as she is trying to close that distance. I just don't know how consistent that's going to be. Now, if the third round does come around, then I do agree with you. Cavalcanti, one of the big storylines, especially coming into this fight, is how is she going to hold up if she fights at that crazy pace throughout the first 2 rounds, especially because we know what's going to be there in the third round, and that's not very much. So I do have Cavalcanti in the matchup, but again, Zarah Fairn has all the skills to win this fight. It just is kind of difficult to pick her in this one.
It will be an interesting one for sure. Fairn training out of All Stars Training Center. You got Volkan Oezdemir out of that gym. You got a few different fighters next weekend on the UFC 293 card coming out of All Stars as well. So both of us in this one going with Cavalcanti. If you look at Fight Night Picks, 86% going with Cavalcanti. But again, as some of those, some of those votes come in, we'll see where it goes. James Curry, Fairn does not have a good gas tank either. James Curry, she did her last time out, so I don't know what to tell you there, bud. Matt, Farid Basharat taking on Kleydson Rodrigues, OKR, coming in at 134.5 pounds for bantamweight. This is Rodrigues' first pro fight at bantamweight, because he's been a flyweight, struggled to make the weight. 127 when he took on Shannon Ross, got an early first minute knockout there on a big card, UFC 284. That was in Australia. Rodrigues came in at 129 to fight Tatsuro Taira back in June. The fight fell out, and now KR forced to move up in weight. And I likened his case a little bit to Halian Paiva, who looked good at 125 but couldn't make the weight anymore. Had a fight of the night against Kyler Phillips, who's right up there on the fringes of the ranks. And then he lost 2 fights and he was out.
The flip side, though, John Lineker couldn't make weight at 125, went up to 135, and knocked everybody dead until he was ranked.
John Lineker was really good. Kleydson Rodrigues is really good. He's had some 50-50 fights. I thought he had a good kind of chance at sniffing a win when he took on CJ Vergara. It didn't really go his way. But when you do look at this fight, Matt, I mean, KR hits hard. The spins are great. He throws a lot of spinning elbows, a lot of spinning kicks to the body. We got a fighter coming up in Felipe Dos Santos next week that's going to be taking on Manal Kopp. They fight very similarly, and they both train out of Shoot the Box Diego Lima. So a good fight for KR to debut, because I think he's going to get that same type of striking acumen from a guy in ferocious Farid Basharat here.
This is what I worry about with Kleydson Rodrigues, especially in this matchup. If he does go for a lot of those high impact strikes, if he goes for a lot of spins, I think he's going to miss quite a few of them, because Farid Basharat will fight you from fairly far away, and he does do a good job at managing his own distance. And yes, sometimes he can be backed up in his fights, but he does do a pretty good job getting his back off the cage, and he has good takedown defense once it does hit that position when his opponents try to take him down. But I've said this a lot. Basharat's got to get a finish at some point. I really thought he was going to be like that A-tier prospect. He still could be, don't get me wrong, but he has had fights where you go, okay, if he put his foot down a little bit more, he might be able to get them out of there. So we'll be really curious to see if A, he can do enough damage to hurt a guy like Kleydson Rodrigues, who is going to be in his face for the majority of this matchup.
Farid Basharat, the Ryan Spann of the bantamweight division.
Well, he doesn't get stopped like it's going out of style, but for Basharat, again, he has all the skills in the world. You know how good his accuracy is, how good those long-range techniques are. He's got decent defensive submissions as well. It's just, can he put them all together to go out there and put on one of those complete performances that really does get an imprint in UFC fans' minds around the world as, hey, this guy could be sort of the next contender in the division, because I do think he has all those skills, especially at this young age. He just has to really go out there and start proving it.
Hype MMA, much appreciated. Thank you for tuning in. Keep hitting up that chat. Toss the like out there. 88% of the fans at Fight Night Picks going with Farid Basharat in this one. Seems like a lot of discredited Kleydson Rodrigues' run, but if you go back and even watch Rodrigues' last fight when he was with Jungle Fights to get the belt, he was utilizing his good striking to then mix in some of his takedowns.
Jungle Fights has been a mixed bag.
Use the grappling. Wallet Ishmael all over that damn
He's a promoter, I'll give him that.
But yeah, both of us in this one going with Farid Basharat to get the win.
It would just be nice to see like 10% more into Basharat. That's all I'm saying. Even if he wins at 30-27, it can be really nice. But he has all the skills to get finishes in this division.
Sound like Michael Bisping when he does the commentary. It's like the UFC's paying him extra money to say, this guy's got to get a finish even though they're all over a fight.
Well, I think he does that. Again, when you're one of those top tier prospects, you just keep on winning 30-27s, that's great, right? But eventually you're going to fight people who are great at everything, and they can hurt you with their shots, and you need a little bit more than just a good gas tank and good striking accuracy.
You don't want that Theodore in him. Matt, the next matchup, Nora Cornolle making that UFC debut, the Muay Thai striker taking on Joselyne Edwards. And Matt, I have to say, Joselyne Edwards made the weight.
She
did.
You
like to see that. Edwards taking on Cornolle, who's 6-1. She debuted against Jacqueline Cavalcanti, who's on this card. And Cornolle did not get the win. But if you only watched just in a snapshot, that first round, it was wild. I mean, Cavalcanti, like, absolutely flatlines Cornolle, who then gets back up, lands a spinning back elbow of her own. Cavalcanti's hurt. It was a wild fight. But going back and watching the Cornolle fights, she didn't really fight the greatest level of competition at all. At all. She fought some smaller women. She was able to have some striking advantages against them. And the one thing that I thought for Cornolle when I went back and watched these fights was she utilizes the clinch quite a bit. Sometimes it's there so she can land her elbows and her knees. Sometimes it's just to hang out, and then she will go in and look for some of the takedowns. She's shown a good grappling game on the mat, but again, the level of competition is not near UFC level whatsoever. So the submissions might be there on her record. For me, I don't see Cornolle using that in this matchup, even though Edwards has shown a little bit of, some defensive lapses in the UFC with the takedown defense. She showed it against Carol Hossa. She showed it against Jessica Rose Clark, who's no longer in the UFC. But for me, even though Cornolle is a very good striker, I look at this fight like Angela Hill taking on Loma Lookboonmee. You got the pure Muay Thai striker on the left-hand side of the screen. You've got a pretty darn good striker on the right-hand side of the screen. And I think Joselyne Edwards is quite a bit better than Cornolle in this one.
I'm going to stick with what I said at the start of the week. I think this fight's going to be really close by the end of it. Not because these fighters are close skill-wise, just the way that this fight's going to go. I think we are going to see a lot of clinch out of both athletes. Because in the beginning, we're going to have two fighters at very long range, right? Joselyne Edwards will fight on the back foot. She does want to get her kicks involved before she really commits with her hands. And if that's the case, then Cornolle's probably going to be chasing her for quite a bit. And I do think it's going to take her a little bit of time before she can close that distance and initiate the clinch. And from that spot, I mean, your guess is as good as mine for who the judges are going to give some of these rounds to. I just think the rounds themselves are going to be fought very closely, each one in, each one out. So it could be 30-27 one way or the other. It could be a chintzy split decision. I have Joselyne Edwards because I think she can do more off of the back foot in this matchup. And if she does find herself initiating any of these exchanges, she should be able to have success. But again, if Nora can use that clinch to just put out any fire Joselyne Edwards starts burning with, then she might be able to go out there and get a win.
And things like this happen, I wouldn't say all the time, but kind of once in a blue moon, where I'll be completely down on a prospect with watching the tape on the regional scene. They come into the UFC and then they have themselves an awesome performance.
Chaos Williams.
We have a look at the votes at Fight Night Picks. 61% of the fans going with Joselyne Edwards in this one. We'll have a look and see what the odds are in it too, because I don't know. They're pretty darn close. Joselyne Edwards a slight favorite, minus 125 for Edwards. So yeah, for me, going with Edwards, we're in agreement on this one. But again, unranked bantamweights, there's not many of them.
Do you got a coin that we can flip? Because
yeah, I can't say that I do, Matt. Then we move on to welterweight, the re-entry of the Cage Warriors welterweight champ, Rhys McKee. McKee taking on the last ninja, Ange Loosa. I bet we get a big pop out of the crowd for Ange Loosa, representing Congo and Switzerland. And for Loosa, I mean, this is a guy that trains at a Killcliff FC. We threw the picture up there at the start of the week, training with Michael Chandler and the like. Loosa's one of those guys where he's pretty darn good at everything. I mean, that might not steal the show. That might not get you at the top of the marquee anytime soon, but his offensive wrestling's pretty good. His volume's usually pretty good. It's just, if he's caught on the outside of the reach of some of his opponents, that's where he struggles. And he did against Jack Della Maddalena. He did against Munir Lazez. And those are really the only two examples near the highest level that we can give you. But for Ange Loosa, when everything's flowing, it does look really good. And he's one of those guys, either whether he's getting the finish, putting the pressure on you, or he keeps that effort all through the 3 rounds. He's a tough guy to get out of there. And for Rhys McKee, I think you shored up some of the defensive liabilities. If I sit here and put my shoulders behind my back and I move my core, you can move your core.
Like you're moving your head right now to get it out of
my
danger.
head is straight and I'm moving my core.
As your head moves around on screen. Perfect.
But when you look at a guy like Rhys McKee, the movement on the feet's gotten better. The movement with his head has gotten quite a bit better. We haven't necessarily seen him tagged as much in his last 3 fights. The level of competition
has not been as good.
In those last 3 fights hasn't been amazing. And for me with Rhys McKee, I'm not saying he fought a guy that was similar in the UFC in Alex Morono. Alex Morono has better movement than Ange Loosa. Alex Morono throws way more volume than most welterweights that you're going to see. And he out-volumed the volume striker in Rhys McKee on that night. So for me, I still do have Rhys McKee in the matchup, but I think this is a fun, very close fight at welterweight.
The reason I have Ange Loosa really comes down to the kicks, and if he can immobilize some of the movement of Rhys McKee, especially with those leg kicks, I do think it's going to make it a lot easier for him to land on the target. Now, this should be a crazy fight. If it was up to me, this would be on the fight of the night screen, just because stylistically these guys do match up so well, and I think we will get one of those really high-paced, fun action type of fights. It really does come down to who can outlast their opponent. Either can Loosa damage McKee enough to where he's not that crazy fighter in the 3rd round, who can have an uptick in volume even after throwing an insane level of volume throughout the first 2 rounds, or can McKee do well enough defensively to avoid some of those shots himself and then really start to pull away as the fight continues. I don't think there really is a right answer in this fight because it is so close, but I do think the kicks of Loosa are going to be a big deal, and I think he is going to be able to disguise some of his takedown attempts. I don't think he's going to go out there and wrestle. That's not what I'm saying at all, but I think he's going to be able to at least use the clinch to get closer to McKee. So for those reasons, I do have Loosa.
We've got ER saying Loosa had a solid fight with JDM. You go back and watch that one. It was definitely a fun fight to watch. 64% of the fans going with Ange Loosa to get the win in this fight. I think it's going to be an awesome one. You look at the odds in it, and Ange Loosa is the favorite here. Open minus 188, minus 164 right now. So things shifting towards the underdog in Rhys McKee. And then, Matt, we move into our next fight. It's the Milk Truck taking on Double Impact Taylor Lapilus. And this is one that was thrown in on short notice because originally Loughran was supposed to be taking on Yanis Ghemmouri. Ghemmouri now fighting against William Gomis at featherweight. Loughran, he was the Cage Warriors bantamweight champ. We mentioned some of the winners in that division previous. Dominic Wooding is another one of those.
I just love the thought of like Li Jingliang reading the news about the opponent switch this weekend and be like, they're back at it again, those sons of guns.
Just wearing a suit, eating his breakfast. So now Lapilus, who was due, the Combat Sambo man that was Muin Gafurov, whose uncle was the head of Combat Sambo.
And I think that would have been a fun fight, honestly.
Yeah, that would have been a fun fight. So for Lapilus, what's he good at? Striking. Very, very good at striking. He's not a huge kicker, but his boxing's awesome. From that tricky southpaw stance, he will throw that left as a straight or as a hook, and he'll really do a lot of work to the two levels, being the body and the head, to make his opponents guess. Now, for Lapilus, you go back, you look at the first UFC run, he beats Rocky Lee. Not very good. He beats Oka Sasaki as a big underdog. He finishes him, and then he goes in there against Eric Perez, drops him. Perez is getting back up, and Lapilus, I'm going to show off my grappling today, goes for a guillotine, and then for the rest of the second round, he gets beat. He loses the third round as well. Lapilus loses that fight. He beats Leandro Issa, and then he leaves the UFC. Has a boxing fight. He's gone 7-1 since. He lost to Denis Lavrentiev, who we mentioned, a good fighter. But the wins that he's had recently, is Loughran better than DeMarte Pena? I don't know.
He could be.
Taylor Lapilus was able to finish Pena quick in the first round of that one. Now, Lapilus hasn't fought in over a year. Broke his left hand because he was supposed to debut this time last year on that Paris card against Khalid Taha, which I think, now it's easy to say that in hindsight, but I think Khalid Taha is a much easier debut than Loughran. I know this was one that we were split on the pick too, but I think this is going to be...
both had Lapilus.
No, I have Loughran in this one.
Oh.
I think this is going to be an awesome fight.
I think it should be a really good fight, too. The problem is for Lapilus, and I'm going to stick with the pick, everything he does well could also get him caught by Loughran, and that's what really worries me in this matchup. Because I broke it down at the start of the week. Lapilus is a really good rangy southpaw striker, right? You bring it up. He can throw the left in a multiple different ways. He likes going to the body with it. He will use that left kick to the body, too, and to the leg. Again, not the highest volume of it, but those are techniques he has. If he throws the left kick to the body, he can get taken down off that. If he throws a bunch of kicks anyways, he can get taken down off that. And the one thing about Lapilus that I don't love, at the middle to long range, he's really good. An extremely talented striker. When he closes the distance, it can get a little sloppy sometimes. The hooks aren't as straight. The straights aren't as good either. He'll just kind of wade forward and start throwing wild hooks. And at those moments, if Loughran can then duck underneath, get the takedown, and get on top, well, that's a position he can have a lot of success with, especially with how heavy he is in that top position. I don't know if he's just going to give it up right after he accomplishes the takedown. So this is a fight of two extremes, I think. If Lapilus can stay on the outside and really stick to that part of his game, 30-27 might be a step too far, but you get the idea. I think he can have more success than not in that position, but if he does find himself defending a lot of takedowns, especially early on, it might be a little bit too difficult for him to kind of make up the difference as the fight goes on.
And we'll see if for Loughran, it's going to be kind of a UFC foray like Mason Jones, where they just throw you into the deep end early and you take tough fights against Mike Davis and David Onama, or for Loughran, will he be able to go out there like his last fight in Cage Warriors? You're going into enemy territory in Italy, taking on an Italian and Dylan Hazan. You're touching him up in the first round, finishing him, in the second round. So I think it's an awesome fight. I have no idea what the fans are thinking on this one. At Fight Night Picks, 57% going with double impact Taylor Lapilus, the former TKO champ here in Quebec. Matt, Lapilus able to get the win over Nate Maness. Wouldn't that be an awesome rematch at 135? I think that'd be a lot of fun. Again, for me, I have Loughran. I do like the fact that he can box himself in tight to then drop really quick and get his levels under him. But yeah, this is going to be a great fight. And we've seen the UFC this week push one fighter a ton. A heavyweight that's not Gane and Sergey Spivak.
If you don't know, now you know.
Not Taylor Lapilus, Tom Aspinall. And Tom Aspinall has been doing a lot of stuff with John Gooden in the UFC. Tom trains in the same gym as Loughran at a Team Cowbon. So I think it's going to be an awesome one. Cider, can you please share what styling product I use for my hair? Oh, good question. I accidentally put my Ruzel in my carry-on bag because I never take carry-on to go away. I did that this week. They said, that's too big of a jar. So I threw it out and I picked myself up some Old Spice. As long as you know what you're doing and you do it every day, everything looks the same. So that's what I'm using today. But yeah, for me, going with Loughran in this
I thought he was going to beat the brakes off Ghemmouri, though, so I do think quite highly of Loughran. I just have Lapilus ever so slightly.
And this is one of the fights on this card. Like I said, it was Zarah Fairn in her matchup against Cavalcanti. I like Cavalcanti as a prospect, but I have a lot of question marks. I look at this matchup, Matt. Morgan Charriere, 4 title fights with Cage Warriors, and in the losses, Vucenic, he's a good fighter. Paul Hughes, really good fighter. Soren Bach, fights once in a blue moon.
Pretty good, though, when he does fight.
Wish we got to see him more, but he lost those 3 fights, but the one that he was able to win, he was able to get the belt against Perry-Andre Goodwin, one of my favorite fighters to watch with Cage Warriors, because that guy gets into slobber knockers. So, Matt, for Morgan Charriere, the big question is, does he lead the dance with his striking, or is he cool to counter-strike on the outside, which he does in 95% of his fights? Because if he does, Manolo Zecchini is one of those guys that just goes forward, throws tons of pressure, tons of volume at you, and can make things difficult for his opponents. And like I said at the start of the week, I wrote down that this guy's a clear B-side before I started to write any of my notes, and the more and more I watched tape on Zecchini, the more and more I thought he's got an awesome chance to win this one. I think Charriere's got an awesome left hook on those entries, and I think Charriere can make Zecchini pay. But yeah, the more I watched it, the more I questioned it.
Morgan has a lot of great skills that do stand out, but he does have some weaknesses too that do make you worry. Again, you bring it up. His ability, I guess lack thereof, to just stay back and kind of wait for that one big shot is a little bit concerning. And if he does start to move his way up the division, I could see that being a big Achilles heel for him, to where, hey, you're going to fight guys who throw an insane amount of volume, and if you're not able to knock them out, or at least hurt them on numerous occasions, it's going to be really difficult to make up that difference. But I do like his ability to wade out of danger and respond with that right hand. You bring it up. He has a good left hook as well, but the right over the top and as an uppercut, I think are both going to be very key weapons in this matchup, and that's why I do have him in this fight. But again, it could be a fight of the night, even though I feel like it might be a little bit sloppy in the early goings, and then both guys will find their technique as the fight continues.
Well, it should be a good one. Manolo Zecchini, he said it in an interview earlier on with James Lynch that he's going to have his brother, his dad, and Mike Winkeljohn in his corner. It's pretty cool stuff
it's like
there.
Colby Rasmus.
For the Italian fighting in France against France's own Morgan Charriere. And the last Pirate brings a massive crowd. So you're going to hear a big pop for Charriere in this one. Toss a like as we move through it. But Matt, the next matchup, William Gomis gets the short notice draw against Yanis Ghemmouri. Gomis was supposed to take on Lucas Almeida. That would have been an awesome fight.
It would have been.
And Ghemmouri was supposed to take on Caolan Loughran. Almeida out. They rematched it, and Ghemmouri gets to take on Gomis. And this is another one. Ghemmouri pushes a pace in the majority of his fights. He has some pretty darn good kicks. He stands a little bit square. He was, 15-0 kickboxing and Muay Thai. He had a really good run over with Brave CF. Not really the greatest level of competition, but still, when Ghemmouri was going out there, he was able to get wins in impressive fashion. And it seems like when he picks his power shots just right, Ghemmouri is a tough out for anybody. And for William Gomis, he does a lot of striking on the back foot. He likes to implement his grappling ever so often. But Gomis in the UFC, just the 2 fights as a sample size, he hasn't done much, and he's been lucky to get wins. I mean, he took on Jarno Aarons. One judge scored it a 10-10, so that's why it's a majority decision. His last time out, you said it. You actually thought that Francis Marshall won that fight. And one of the judges agreed with you. It was a split decision win for Gomis. But again, the lack of volume and the lack of, a killer instinct, we haven't seen that version of William Gomis since he fought a bite down on the mouthpiece type of guy in Tobias Harila. So I hope that we get that from Gomis today, but it's a tough one to pick a guy who I know is 2-0 in the UFC, but we haven't seen the best of Gomis yet.
And that's why I liken him a little bit to Basharat, and why I bring up, hey, it is really important for you to look amazing in your first few UFC fights when you are that hyped up prospect. Because guess what? When you're a hyped up prospect, eventually you fight Jim Miller. And when you fight Jim Miller, you're probably going to get knocked out. But if you beat Jim Miller, then you are just going to go on and fight insane fights for the rest of your career. And for Gomis, I do think he has the intangibles that could get him up to that level. He does have very fast hands when he decides to throw them. We have seen some of the offensive wrestling, and it is very good when he's able to implement it because he is so rangy with his ability to go from the long distance to the close range. But in that Marshall fight, he was just kind of behind the 8 ball a little bit, and it was a little bit difficult for him to initiate some of his own strikes. I think he only threw 16 significant strikes, or landed only about 16 significant strikes. I know Marshall is a good wrestler, but still, at a certain point, you've got to be able to let your own hands go when you're facing a stylistic matchup like that. I think Gomis is going to be faster than Ghemmouri, though, because Ghemmouri does have that very upright position. He will march you down. He has surprising power because he is a little bit stiff with some of his movements, but when he does land, they'll look like a glancing shot, and then all of a sudden his opponent's on skates. So I think Ghemmouri could win this if he does have that zombie mindset, but if Gomis can keep his back off the cage, I think that's going to be the real key in this matchup. He should be able to win, but it's a very difficult fight to predict.
We have a couple of super chats. We got to hit those. Matt, the boxing prophet, O'Malley is GOAT. Enough said.
What a knockout that was.
And Blues fan 1700 went from one of the more predictable cards to least predictable. Who are your top? Oh, come on, don't ask that. Who are the top 3 most confident picks? Basharat, Cavalcanti, Charriere. Well, I just said that Charriere isn't because of the insane volume and pressure that Zecchini puts on.
Zecchini's not like a world beater.
Cavalcanti, not at all. I think Zarah Fairn's got a way better shot of winning that one than most would say. Oezdemir, Edwards, and yeah, Basharat maybe, but I don't like to go that route.
Oezdemir, Gane, and Basharat.
All right, Matt. I do have William Gomis in this matchup, but again, when Yanis Ghemmouri's moving forward, mixing the kicks and everything to all 3 levels, he makes it a tough fight. And at Fight Night Picks for the total vote, 61% going with William Gomis in the matchup to get the win.
This one I like a William Gomis too. You might remember this guy when we watched wrestling back in the day. Do you remember Vladimir Kozlov?
Yeah.
He was terrible. He was just this big stiff dude that the WWE tried to push, and then they were like, oh, he looks like the Tin Man when he moves around, so they just got rid of him really quick. William Gomis does not want to become the next Vladimir Kozlov, because he did have all that hype coming in. He has looked good in spots.
So many promos
about, oh my goodness, he was a big deal. But for Gomis, he really does need to prove to people why he has that opinion in public mind.
All right, Matt, so we'll move forward. Our next matchup on the card, Volkan Oezdemir taking on Bogdan Guskov. So, Matt, I already mentioned it. They took away my tin of hair stuff when I traveled this week. And then on my travel time back, it's Air Canada. So, first flight was delayed. Second flight was delayed. No reasoning. Then the ground crew wasn't there. So, it was an hour and a half delay. Because they're the worst company in the entire world, and they have no accountability.
I think there's worse companies.
Because there's very little competition in Canadian airspace. But when it does come down to this matchup, Matt, for Bogdan Guskov, I get mad when people stand up too early in the aisles and then they try and butt ahead of people when they're not making a connecting flight after 12 p.m., 12 a.m.
I get mad when people clap when the plane lands.
Look at this loser. Yeah, I'm just going to do this in front of everybody on a plane. I'm going to hit mitts. So what are you doing? Fainting a jab and landing a right cross?
You've never called out Russell Wilson for doing high knees on a plane. Come on, Craig.
Let's ride. Matt, Bogdan Guskov making everybody on the plane, including the
TJ Dillashaw did the same thing. MMA fighters do this stuff for Instagram. I'm not too worried about it.
Well, Matt, Bogdan Guskov gets to make that UFC debut against Volkan Oezdemir. When you look at this one, Bub Collins saying, I got Guskov. Why? Why?
Well, I can tell you why.
Because he's got a strong right hand that he throws sparingly.
And Volkan doesn't throw crazy volume, will back up, can get hit by big shots. So that part of the equation's pretty much done. Like, Volkan could get hit by big shots in this fight and go down. Like, Volkan's not the same guy who was no time. Maybe he can go out there and get a finish, but even if he does, that doesn't say, hey, I'm the same guy who knocked out Jimmy Manuwa in like 5 seconds. I just don't know how much Volkan has left in the tank personally, because if he does move backwards, if he's not that aggressive version that we saw in the Ilir Latifi fight, where he beat the brakes off Ilir Latifi, and it was that confident version of Volkan. The reason I brought up Trey Turner at the start of the week is because I think Volkan Oezdemir's fighting style is a lot like Trey Turner playing baseball. If the crowd is behind him, if he's feeling confident about himself, then he might march forward, use that left hook not only to the body and to the head, and have a lot of success. But if we do see that retreating version of Volkan Oezdemir, I could see him lose this fight.
Yeah, I mean, Oezdemir's big problem is his defenses are his arms. That works at women's bantamweight. It doesn't work as well at light heavyweight. And Bogdan, the only time we've seen him fight a good fighter in Vasilevsky, he gets dropped by a jab, and he gets back up, and he gets dropped by a right hand. So for me, I absolutely hate watching Guskov fights. I think he's, again, one of the worst fighters to make a UFC debut in a long time. I kind of want him to win now. You know what? And if he wins, he wins. But Bogdan Guskov, it didn't mean anything to me trying to watch.
Like Demetrius Johnson himself said this last week. MMA is the easiest sport to become champion in. Guess why? Because in boxing, if you're a boxer and you're fighting a boxer, that's what they're really good at. In MMA, there's so many areas where you can have a weakness that anybody can win any fight.
Bogdan Guskov's a brand belt in grappling or in jiu-jitsu. We never see it because he can't get takedowns. Like, Bogdan is...
You ever heard of Gregory Rodrigues?
He's awful. He's awful. He's so bad.
Awful? No, I'm not going to say awful.
Whoa, hold on. Bob's saying, why would he be so high up on the card in his debut? Because Guskov's taking this fight on very, very short notice. No, that's why he's getting this one so high up on the card. Oezdemir is supposed to fight a fellow ranked fighter in Azamat Murzakanov. I think Oezdemir Guskov goes like Strickland versus Abus Magomedov. So, Matt, next matchup on the card, Benoit Saint-Denis taking on Thiago Moises. I know a lot of people are very excited about this matchup at lightweight. Moises trying to get back into the rankings with a win over the French fighter who's absolutely on fire. Both guys with finishes in their last number of fights. For Moises, it's 2 in a row. For Saint Denis, it's 3 in a row. And I think this is going to be an awesome fight. Matt, yeah, I mean, Benoit Saint Denis, the thing that worries me, though, he's one of those guys, pressure, power in his takedowns, and it could get him caught in a submission, because then you're just going right to where Thiago Moises excels. And for Moises, when it's standing, sometimes he gets mean, and he looks like he's got a dip in, and that just getting angry.
Well, Tony Gwynn.
Yeah, but he's got a little bit of like a John Fitch to him. So for me, I do like Benoit Saint Denis, but it'll be an interesting one here.
It all comes down to how much can Moises do outside of just grappling. Because if he can have success with the striking, then this should be a pretty close fight, and it should be a very entertaining one at that. But if he does find himself, especially on the back foot, just reacting to what Benoit Saint Denis does, it's going to be a difficult fight for Moises, because he's never been a guy who really wows you with his hands or his technique. Yes, he can have success. He can throw some good boxing combinations. He does keep his hands high for the most part, but again, he doesn't necessarily have the speed to go along with some of that technique. And Benoit Saint Denis never stops going. He is like the Energizer Bunny. Now, could he outdo himself by working at such a high pace throughout the early rounds? He could, and we've seen that
in his career.
Exactly. But for Moises, unless he is able to go out there and get one of those Hail Mary submissions or set up a submission from the early goings, like we saw Nick Lentz do against Will Brooks, be like, hey, you can take me down over and over and over again, and I'm just going to modify this guillotine ever so slightly every single time. Maybe Moises does have that grappling IQ. Not even maybe. He does have that grappling IQ to go out there and get a submission win like that, but I think it's going to be a difficult ask to just be reacting to your opponent for 15 straight minutes, and that's why I have Saint Denis, even though I will say, this is a massive step up in competition from Bonfim to Moises, so maybe we do see some more weaknesses out of Saint Denis by just jumping up so many spots in the division.
Bug Collins, you keep your pick on Guskov, and you can come back and you can tease me if he's able to get the win over Oezdemir. When it does come down to this one, Thiago Moises coming out of the bigger gym, American Top Team. You got Benoit Saint Denis training close to home, and we have a look, 85% of the fans going with Benoit Saint Denis. He's one of those fighters where you have a UFC debut that goes so bad, a fight on about a month's notice against Eliseu Zaleski dos Santos, take a lot of time off, and then he comes back, wins 3 in a row, and now everybody likes him. Super chat from Boxing Profit, much appreciated. Thank you very much for hitting that up. If you can't hit the super chat, just toss a like. It takes 2 seconds, and there's not a ton of them up there. But Matt, we will move forward into the co-main event of the evening. And this one, I'm going to have a look at Fight Night picks and see what people have. 62% of the fans going with Manon Fiorot in the matchup at home.
This fight to me is one of those close fights on paper that won't be close when you just look at the result of it, right? Because if Namajunas goes out there and wins by rear naked choke in the first round, it's probably not going to tell you the story about especially both fighters' skill sets. Because for Fiorot, this is supposed to be her launching board into a title shot, right? Alexa Grasso is our new champion. She just beat Valentina not that long ago. It's an exciting time in this division because we do have a little bit of that turnover. Jennifer Maia is not necessarily at the top of the division anymore. So for Fiorot, if she's able to go out there and even get a finish over somebody like Rose Namajunas, I don't know how you don't give her the title shot next, but the problem is, at least my issue is for Fiorot in this matchup, does she have all of the other skills that we just necessarily haven't seen up until this point? Because Rose is going to test your takedown defense at some point. She is going to test your defensive grappling at some point. And I brought it up earlier on in the week because I really do think that standing rear naked choke position is going to be there. I think Rose is going to go for the hips quite a few times, try to cycle Fiorot to the ground. If she's not able to get it, she'll reverse to her back and try to climb up her that way. She's done it in numerous other fights before. I know moving up in weight might be a little bit concerning to see how her strength does transfer from 115 to 125. But I just think Rose is more skilled when you look at all of her skill sets. Even though on the feet, I can admit this, she could just get blasted by Manon.
And the scary thing about it for me, I talked about it at the start of the week, look at Manon Fiorot's fight against an accredited jiu-jitsu practitioner in Quebec's Corinne Laframboise. It's Fiorot initiating the takedowns, beating her up on top, not getting submitted, and rinsing and repeating until she gets a finish in the third round. And Matt, did you see the news this week?
I did.
Corinne's out of her fight on Contender Series.
That would be like if I beat like Patrick Beverly in a game of one-on-one, and then I was like, all right, Steph, you're next. Like, there's levels. I don't think Laframboise is nearly as good as Rose Namajunas.
It is a no, but it just has to say, like, that is her biggest kind of skill set, is getting things down to the mat and using her jiu-jitsu. And when somebody like Fiorot who's known as a pure striker, is able to do that to her. That was the one that kind of showed me, okay, she can definitely win and hang against the Ricci's, the Leonardos, the so-ons and so forths. Fiorot, last time out, beats Caitlin Chukagian on the outside. Not the greatest fight on the rewatch. But when you do look at this one, again, the scariest part about it is, well, what version of Rose Namajunas shows up? Because we've seen an awesome version before against Joanna, both fights, against Zhang Wei Li, against Jessica Andrade in one fight of the night, and then another fight of the night. She got finished in one, she won the other one.
She was still winning that first fight, though, before she got knocked out.
Connor is saying Fiorot easy, size difference is nuts. We also saw a super chat from Bub Collins. Craig, I never tease you. All respect always. Much appreciated, Bub Collins. But for me, I do have Rose Namajunas in this one. If I get it wrong, I'm going to move forward to next week and not think about it all that much because, again, Fiorot has such a good variety of strikes, whether she's backing up, utilizing that side kick to the body, or if she's marching these women down, utilizing her boxing. It is very good. I like Namajunas ever so slightly, but yeah, this is a tough fight.
And it's an important fight, too, because where does the loser go? Because we know what's going to happen to the winner, right? You're probably going to get a guaranteed title shot. These are, it's the number one contender in the division, and then Rose, who basically could be a number one contender whenever she wants to be. So I think it's a really important fight. If Fiorot loses, she could probably just go back to fighting other ranked women at 125 pounds. But for Rose, is she going to stay at the weight class? Does she move back down? There's a lot of question marks in this fight.
It will be a big time matchup for sure. So both of us with Namajunas in the matchup. And then we move it forward, Matt, to the heavyweight main event. Do bigger grapplers at heavyweight usually beat the rest? I mean, Frank Mir was able to win a title.
Fabricio Verdum would like to talk to you.
Verdum,
Velasquez.
For sure. So when you look at a fight like this, Matt, Spivac, he's rolling, beating Derek Lewis, beating Augusto Sakai, and the like. Spivac's last loss against Tom Aspinall again. If whoever wins this one, Tom Aspinall's there. Does he walk into the cage and cut a Brock Lesnar promo? Like he cut his teeth for real? I don't know.
I'd be down for that.
But when you look at this fight, Matt, for Spivac, when he gets pressured, that's when he struggles. The fight against Wald Harris, the fight against Aspinall as the examples. And when you look at Ciryl Gane in the UFC, we saw him struggle against the grappling of Ngannou, struggle against the grappling of John Jones. He was able to, he got wobbled and rocked by Tai Tuivasa until he came back to beat him. And for Gane, it wasn't necessarily the easiest run-up because he was just smoking pretty well everybody. Had a close fight against Alexander Volkov, and now we're here. And Volkov, co-main event next week against Tai Tuivasa on one of the worst pay-per-views of this year. But you consider this fight, Matt, at heavyweight. I know people are kind of all over the place. 69% here in the chat going with Gane. Does that surprise you?
Not really, just because he is the much more well-known commodity at the top of the division, at least. Yes, he lost to John Jones and Francis, but guess what? Most people in the heavyweight division would lose to John Jones and Francis. And I understand the way that he lost to Ngannou might give a lot of people hesitations, especially in this matchup, because Sergey is such a unique fighter, right? Like, I know we've seen Alexei Oleinik before. We have seen some heavyweight grapplers, but Spivak's ability to go out there and get hip throws in top position. What?
He's young Tybura. We said that for the longest
time. But I
time.
don't think he is. Tybura threw head kicks and was much more of a striker when he was younger, and then has become much more wrestling heavy as his career's progressed. Whereas Spivac, that's always been how he gets his bread buttered, is take his opponent to the mat, use that great ground and pound, and then open up some of the submissions. And I went back and rewatched the Derek Lewis fight before we even started this, and that hip toss was really nice. And I do think that could be something he could have success with against Gane, but the difference between Gane and Derek Lewis is one guy plants his feet, and yeah, he'll throw flying knees, so maybe it's not the best example. You get the idea. Derek Lewis, when he's in the pocket, will plant his feet and throw from the hip. Whereas Ciryl Gane never stops moving. And I do think his ability to get his back off of the cage, other than the John Jones fight, should be able to get the win against Spivac. Because Spivac is a good fighter moving forward, but he can leave some defensive openings when he is marching forward. And moving backwards, he's not the greatest fighter. So if Sergey can somehow get Ciryl Gane up against the cage, plant his own feet and have some success in that spot, maybe he can look good, but I just think the movement of Gane's going to be really difficult for Spivac to deal with.
And we've seen Spivac get better at his striking.
For sure.
Again, the Oleinik fight, Oleinik is what he is, and there were a lot of people that weren't impressed by his performance in that one, but Spivac was just going out there. Yeah, he didn't get the finish, but he beat up Oleinik on the feet. He was able to push him off and then go to
was
town.
47.
With a lot of his strikes, and then, yeah, Oleinik went over and fought, who was it? Somebody over in Russia and get absolutely flatlined after he left the UFC. But when you do look at this one, again, 69% of the fans going with Gane. Again, the takedowns, they scare you for Gane. The sideways, almost like a karate stance with the lead leg out, that could scare you a little bit. But for me, I do like Gane in the fight. I think the striking is going to win out for him. And if he pushes a pace, Just like that Jairzinho Rosenstrike fight. I think we could see a Ciryl Gane.
I hope this fight's a lot more entertaining than that one.
I would be really interested to see if this one even goes 5 rounds. I don't necessarily think it will. I think one of the guys might be able to get a finish, but these two guys are very interesting heavyweights for sure.
If Spivac wins, it'll be inside the distance. I genuinely don't think he can win a decision in this one. That's the only, I think Gane could win a decision. We've seen it before. He has good volume from the back foot. He doesn't throw crazy power. I know he's a big guy, but he's not putting everything into every shot he lands. So I could see Gane going out there and getting a 5-round decision. But for Spivac, I really do think it's going to have to come down to his ability to damage Gane while he is on the ground, because you don't know how many of those opportunities are going to come up in this matchup because of how good the movement of Gane is. So if Spivac does get that top position, even if there's 20 seconds left in the round, he has to put everything he has into that ground and pound to try to soften up Gane as this fight continues.
All right, Matt. Folks, you got to toss a like on the way out. We'll rip back up through this card. Early stuff here on a Saturday. And we have, first fight on the card. Fairn taking on Cavalcanti. Just stay away from this fight. They're unranked women's bantamweights. One's 6-5 and one's 5-1. I have Cavalcanti ever so slightly.
I've also got Cavalcanti.
All right, Matt. The next matchup, Basharat taking on Kleydson Rodrigues. I've got Basharat.
I've got Basharat in this matchup. This should be a really fun fight, though.
Nora Cornolle taking on Joselyne Edwards, going with Edwards.
I'm also going with Edwards, but just the way I think this fight's going to go, it's going to be really close.
All right. Then we have Ange Loosa taking on Rhys McKee, going with Skeletor McKee.
I like Loosa in this fight, and I think this is fight of the night.
All right. Then we have Lapilus taking on Caolan Loughran, going with Caolan Loughran to get the win.
I like Lapilus in the matchup, but again, this should be another really fun fight for the matchup.
All right.
I'm more excited about this rearrangement of opponents than the Gomis versus Ghemmouri one.
Yeah. Morgan Charriere taking on Zecchini. I've got the last pirate, but again, I don't love it. Charriere's a big favorite because, again, French fans love him. He was a former Cage Warriors champ. Zecchini hasn't fought the same level of competition over the Venator, but stylistically, Zecchini pressures, puts on a pace, and he's got really good volume, and Charriere can wait and bait to counter-strike and not land a lot of shots. So it could be one of those ones where Zecchini goes up on the numbers, but Charriere was landing the tougher shots or harder shots. I've got Charriere, but this should be an awesome fight.
I didn't like the last pirate nickname at the start of the week, but I've changed my mind. I kind of like the last pirate.
Man, they've got pirate flags.
Yeah, it's
like
fun.
Charriere's last fight, his fans, and there were a lot of them, and it wasn't in France, had balloons, and they were throwing confetti like it was a wedding. So
it's fun stuff.
Big win for Charriere there. Gomis taking on Ghemmouri. I've got Gomis in the fight.
I've also got Gomis, but it could be a really close fight again.
All right, Oezdemir taking on the man that punches on a plane. There were no snakes, I don't think, but Volkan Oezdemir taking on Bogdan Guskov. I've got Oezdemir.
I've got Oezdemir, but again, I just don't know what version of him is going to show up, and that's what concerns me.
All right, Saint-Denis taking on Thiago Moises, going with Benoit Saint-Denis.
I've also got Benoit Saint-Denis, but it's Moises is that dangerous on the mat to where you can never be that confident in a fighter taking him on, especially one who might wrestle in the matchup. So I've got Saint-Denis, but Moises has a great chance to win.
Fiorot taking on Namajunas. I've got Namajunas.
I've also got Rose. I just think on the mat she can have a big difference, or she can make a big difference if she is able to get it down, because her grappling is very, very skillful. She does a great job at taking the back of her opponent, and if she is able to get Fiorot in some of those compromising positions, it might burn her arms out a little bit to where she doesn't have the same pop at the end of her shot.
Doughboy Paul, thanks for tuning in. Vulcan saying Ian isn't legit. Well, he's pretty high up the rankings now. Matt, the main event, Ciryl Gane taking on Sergey Spivak, going with Gane in the fight. We'll see if the grappling can win out for Sergey Spivak out of that big gym in Extreme Couture with Eric Nixon.
This is a real big make-or-break fight, though, for Ciryl Gane. Because, again, he was promised as the next big prospect in the heavyweight division. He looked great until he did suffer a couple stumbling blocks. So if he can go out there and beat Sergey Spivak, then maybe it's all forgotten, right? Maybe you could put him in a fight against Tom Aspinall. It should be a crazy main event, and everyone loves it again. But he does need to beat Sergey Spivak if he wants to maintain this spot in the division. So I've got Gane, but I think this is an oddly important main event.
We'll toss a like on the way out. The next card coming up, UFC 293. It's Adesanya taking on Strickland. A lot of debuts and a lot of not ranked fighters. It's a bad
Jamie Mullarkey's fighting, though, and we get oddly excited for that.
He just got knocked out not long ago, and he's fighting Halifax's own John McDessie. Call me the Bull. So, Matt, a big-time fight there. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say,
let's get into it.